Hello, everyone. It's Friday, December 5th. It's just over 9 a.m. here in Montreal, and I want to welcome you all for a very special edition of the Piar Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Tan Sukhera, CEO and co-founder of Piar, a company offering workshops to global communications leaders for decision quality and judgment as we navigate the AI age, borrowing frameworks from adjacent industries to apply to the comms world designed to make leaders far more effective at strategic thinking than ever. Truthfully, I'm a bit nervous about this session because, to be perfectly honest, many may simply not want to learn the truth of what's happening in the PR and comms world. And in fact, it extrapolates out quite far, but that will be a conversation for another day. Today's guest is an author, a friend, and a colleague who's bound to enlighten you, a critical thinker whose research and work in AI have helped some of the largest and iconic organizations in the world solve problems that nobody else could. And that includes big agencies and big consulting. I'm speaking about Frank Buckler. Frank Buckler's work is built on a simple idea. Growth comes from understanding what truly drives success and not from copying generic best practices. With a background spanning marketing, engineering, management consulting, and corporate leadership, he sees patterns others often overlook. He began researching AI back in 1994, driven by the question of causality. Why do people buy? And his PhD work developed a causal AI methodology that remains SUPRA's foundation today. Evidence first, informed by knowledge and not assumption. Frank, it's a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start here. For the audience, this topic can be a little bit complex for many, so I'm going to do a quick level set. We've all heard the phrase correlation does not equal causation, but we likely don't know how to prove causation. And in many cases, we mistake correlation for causation. Public relations and communications leaders have been working on the measurement problem for ages, and they've developed best practices that stop short of proving causation. Sometimes people unknowingly, and I did so myself, would lean on correlation as if it were in fact causation, but it leads invariably to decisions built on risk, uncertainty, assumptions, and misconceptions. Frank, causal inference and causal AI has grown deep roots and cemented over the last 5 years as a major and increasing spend among the Fortune 500. And as highlighted by Gartner studies, the question is, why is that causal can solve problems where pattern recognition and relying on correlation just fails?
So actually, the answer is pretty simple. So in business, in PR and marketing and comms, what we want are driving actions. We want to do something that works. So if you do something that works, then it builds on truth. So when I'm saying truth, I don't mean facts. I mean the mechanisms between action and outcomes. And this mechanisms, the nature, how the nature works or how the consumer works, that is, we call causality. Yeah, there are hidden mechanisms we need to uncover to make good decisions. And I give you an analogy to grasp why it's not so easy. So, for instance, if you look at a PC plate, with all these chips, and you may have a scan where you see the electrons running and stuff like that. You may figure out, oh, here that's probably the processor, right? But all this imaging will not tell you what the processor actually is doing. Yeah, you will not really understand, although you gather all the data where all the electrons plopping up. You don't understand what's going on. So, and even it's the same with neuroscience. In neuroscience, we scan the brain, we see where things are popping up, which helps us a lot, but it's still just data. Yeah. And now with technologies like causal AI, it takes the data and finds the hidden, invisible mechanics. You cannot measure causality. You cannot measure mechanics. You can only infer them. Yeah, and that's why it's so powerful. And the problem is that they are kind of invisible. Like for centuries, people believed that the world is flat because this wrong belief was not proven wrong for easy task like walking 100 meters or so, right? But it was totally wrong for other predictions, like what will happen with the ship over there. So yeah, knowing the ground truth can lead to much better decisions. And the key thing why we need this causal thinking for understanding markets, for understanding customers, is that the type of problems we are facing is very different than in technology. Yeah. Technology is complicated, but not complex. So a complex problem has not just a lot of complicated tasks, but it has a lot of different things which influence the outcome. And even more, you don't know how they interact with each other, and you even don't know when the effect will take place. So there is complexity, there's a lot of drivers, and there's a lot of unknowns, nonlinearities, and so forth. Because the actual problem is much more complex than in technology. Yeah, we in social science are a bit behind in science, and the more we need methodologies which on one hand are more explorative, AI, but on the other hand are really keen to learn the mechanisms, the true mechanisms, not just correlations.
It's fascinating. And that ties into my second question really well. It centers around the dangers of misconceptions. You talked about complexities, not really understanding. There's a huge difference between complex and complicated. And the idea that there could be many reasons why things happen, but they're invisible. And so it ties into this topic around the dangers of misconceptions and assumptions, what people like Rory Sutherland of Ogilvy call the lazy why, which is a tendency of business leaders to really invest enormous sums of money into mapping and plotting out the performance of a business, but really weirdly tend to accept the first answer that they get as to why things are the way they are. They ask why, someone gives an answer. Okay, perfect, thanks. and what sort of assumptions or misconceptions have you come across, Frank? Can you highlight any examples to illustrate where business leaders, let's say like in the C-suite or even just marketing communications leadership, have fallen into avoidable traps?
Yeah, there are quite a few. Let me give you some examples. I mean, the most dominant thing is the matter of spurious correlations. Yeah. So, for instance, we work for a lottery company, and in this business, people and the industry believes their target group are older people. Why? Because much more older people play lottery. So it's a obvious, it's a correlation, and we, as a human, the human mind basically initially comes up with an explanation. You always have a hypothesis why it is, and you need to be careful to not simply just believe it. Yeah, that's what you need to learn in a data century. Because what is happening in this lottery business? Actually, there's a reason why older people play more lottery. The reason we found was causal is there are two drivers of playing lottery, which is habitualization. So actually you make it your habit to just buy a ticket every week. And the second is winning. So when you do this a year or two, once in a while you win some smaller money. And this keeps you hooked, right? And basically, the more time evolves, the more likely you are to stick to it. And time correlates with age. But if you compare, if people are totally the same, but one is old and the others is young, the younger is more likely to buy a ticket. So the opposite is true. The young people are the key audience they need to build on. And actually, we found the very same pattern for donators. Old people donate, but for a reason, because they have saved some money. But actually, people who save the same, the younger age, they are more likely, because older people are not so receptive to donate to someone they don't know, right? And there are more of these, for instance, in marketing mix modeling, yeah, which is already closer to PR, yeah, where we collect all the data. What do we spend? And then we want to explain does it drive sales? We want to know that, but actually to find that out, you need to take a causal look at the data. When we model causally, we don't ask what data we have. We ask what is driving this outcome. And what's driving sales? It's first of all brand. So it doesn't matter so much the advertising I saw yesterday. Yeah. The advertising yesterday, 70% drives the brand, not sales, right? And of course, this depends on the product. For some products, it's 95% or 99% brand. For others, it's maybe 50. But there are intermediate steps like brand building you need to include. There is seasonality, there is eventually competition. So we think we take prior knowledge, we take human wisdom to shape those causal networks. So I can give you many more examples. Maybe another issue with management and is actually the reliance on storytelling. What I mean is the way we check whether something is true or not is actually to see if it's plausible. If it's plausible, okay, then it's probably good, right? So face validity check. But actually, it's like looking in the clouds. You see something. So plausibility check is good. It checks whether or not the finding corresponds with your prior knowledge. Yeah, and if your prior knowledge is good, it's a good check. But oftentimes the prior knowledge is wrong. Yeah. And long story short, plausibility is not a very good check for truth. It's an additional thing you can do. You must do, of course, but we rely on that way too heavy.
So what I'm hearing is that if I can distill it, is that if you want to learn the truth about something, you're going to need to ask better questions, and you might need to look at the problem differently, think differently about the problem, and think differently about your understanding of how it works. You used an example of, we don't ask, what data do we have? We ask, what's driving this outcome? That's a huge mental it's the smallest little incremental detail, right? That's so easy to implement, but it causes such a huge domino reaction if you look at things that way. And I think that's really insightful. Is that the right way? Am I processing that correctly?
Totally. So it's actually, a disease in statistics, because basically they use what they have. Statistical modeling is basically building on a lot of assumptions. They need to make those assumptions, linearities, independent of drivers, because the models are built that way. And if the assumptions are met, those methods are powerful. Yeah. But the problem is 99% do not meet, right? So it's really like having a Formula One car driving through the beach. Yeah, it doesn't work. It's a super fast car, but you need to make sure the street is the right one. So an AI is more like a Range Rover, right? Which goes through any land, because we don't know which land we're driving on. Yeah, we have uncertainty. Yeah, we want to learn, and so we need a more practical, more robust methodology, and that's causal AI.
It reminds me of an age-old anecdote that they use to describe a behavioral science phenomenon, survivorship bias, where anybody in public relations and communications who's been around long enough has probably seen a diagram of a plane with the bullet holes in it. And the story, in World War II about the planes going down and assuming to put the armor where the bullets were, but then thinking about, hey, that's basically, so where do we have bullets? Where do we have the data? What data do we have? Okay, great. Let's put the armor where the bullets are. Perfect. But they didn't save any more lives. Then they said, well, what could be causing these planes to go down? We're missing the rest of they all have the same bullet patterns. Oh, it occurred to them that, wait a minute, it means that if planes are hit by bullets, they don't make it back to us for us to look at the patterns. They went down. So wherever the bullets aren't there, we should reinforce those areas counterintuitively to the way some people would have thought initially. And that's when they started saving lives, and that's when momentum shifted. And so I think that's a terrific example. And Frank, as we could see, causal AI has a ton of business applications like consumer insights, product marketing, communications. If I give you a scenario, that's honestly considered to be, let's say, like the holy grail of the public relations and communications industry. It's proving the impact of earned media campaigns on sales, on company growth. Can you help our, chief communications officer audiences here at, large orgs? Can you break down hypothetically, how does causal AI or causal inference, how could it be applied to prove causality? And before I let you answer, I want to say this is about to be a mic drop moment, so I'm excited to hear the answer.
So first off, let's take the pressure on the analysis, because we don't need to prove causality, the final proof. We just need to become better than we are today. And we do that by finding those non-causal assumptions we are using. So basically, it's actually a quest, a never-ending quest for causality. So that's what it's done. We just need to be better, and we do that by taking and considering and seeing the world from the causal eye, from looking for mechanics in human beings, how they react. And the process is basically a 3-step process, right? The first is, as I already outlined, that we need to first understand what you already know. Yeah, because we already know quite a bit, and oftentimes we find that collecting what we know is not so much interviewing people and looking at literature, because you find so much that is also contradicting each other that it could be also confusing. So there are, for instance, we use successfully a process where audio gate process where we basically enable people to hear their intuition. Basically, our subconscious knows already quite a bit, and that's what we apply and use it for experts or for customers. Yeah, 10, 20 people is enough. That already gives us some key things to look at. Yeah, we just did it for the largest sports organization and found here a factor which later in causal AI proved to be the most important one. So that's the qualitative first phase is the question, where should we look at? And this hypothesis doesn't need to be true. Yeah, we just want to cast a wide net. Step 2 is data collection. So we want to measure all those things, the outcomes, and what is driving you. So basically, if we do PR, we may want to already do that, collect where did we publish, how many eyeballs we maybe seen. But also we want to measure what happens in between. How many people actually have seen it? So how do we know? That's what we can measure, and we do touch point modeling where we take so-called implicit measurement methods. So in market research, and modern market research is not just asking opinions. It uses reaction time testing to find subconscious memory structures. For instance, in market mix modeling or touch point modeling, we find that people, basically in the time they react, we can identify whether or not someone has a sponsorship contact, although he would not be aware of it, actually. Awareness, memory structure is something different. Yeah. The subconsciousness is below awareness, but still it works. It's proven since 50 years with mere exposure and stuff like that. So we measure that with implicit measure methods, and that's how we collect the data. And with this data, in step 3, we can do causal inference and finding the hidden mechanics between actions, perceptions, brand building, sales. But it's really this 3 steps, which is new to many people. Yeah, people believe, just collect data, and then we are data driven. Data is noise. What you want to know is the mechanics that cause those data. Yeah, and that's why you need causal inference.
And so mapping out the relationships between actions, their impacts, that's really at the core of what you're able to do so that it doesn't get conflated with some other attributes, for example. And you're utilizing brand recall, different methodologies to create some implicit testing, some qualitative testing. And when you put them together with the causal AI technology, you end up with something that helps to, at minimum, not do worse. Is that is that a good way to put it? Is it that you just need to do a little better and incrementally improve on things by cutting out what definitely isn't working? Like, is that a good way to
Yeah, yeah,
translate that a bit?
yeah. It's pretty successful. Yeah. So when you look at the find, typically you explain oftentimes double in statistical variance. But really, what matters is what findings can we actually use and drive impact, right? There are probably half of the findings you will say, I already knew that, right? And it would be pretty astonishing if everything is wrong we know today, right? So some things we know are all right. So yeah, but there are a few learnings that really are mind shifting. There are tons of examples for that. So you need also to be open to learn if you do this exercise.
And it may just be a matter of identifying a system, a process, some sort of, there's unconscious things that are maybe holding us back, unconscious biases or assumptions or misconceptions that we are carrying unknowingly, but there may be some that are built into the way that we have created systems and processes. And that's what in behavioral science we call deterministic biases. So if we blindly follow those misconceptions or ways of thinking, let's call them, identifying those and fixing those may mean removing a blocker. Is that another good way to say it? Is it
Yeah,
removing a blocker or identifying a gap or a blind spot, or
yeah.
is it a sword, or is it a shield, or is it both?
It's both, and it's probably best to give some examples. Maybe I could talk in another hour. Just give you one example where the methodology really drove billions of value, which was the application at T-Mobile USA more than 10 years ago, where the company was changing the positioning and everything because they had nothing to lose. They made losses and so forth. So they did basically everything different. Yeah? New positioning, no contract bindings anymore. They introduced a flat rate. They put an iPhone on top of it, and it worked. But in the company, everyone had a different hypothesis what it was. Was it the contract? Was it the iPhone? Was it the flat rate? And what Cause AI found is actually nothing of them. These what I mentioned is the direct cause. It is the positioning as a Robin Hood of the industry, changing wireless for the better. This value positioning was attracting people. And what they did was nurturing, was reasoning this positioning. So what the company learned from this exercise was, hey, all we did, everyone can copy that. But we have this positioning now, and we can invent new features that reasons this positioning. Yeah, and that's what they did. Yeah? And they grew, and now they were a tiny piece of AT&T, and now they are, I don't know if they are same size.
Communications leaders would eat that up. That's a perfect example, because that shows that really, in the end of the day, it wasn't necessarily the tactics, it was the storytelling, it was the narrative, it was the framing, it was the messaging. And that's the sort of stuff that
Yeah.
communicators are put in place at their organizations to handle. Great. Frank, let's assume for a moment that thanks to AI, not generative, but causal, the Holy Grail has been found. Right? Let's say we've been able to connect the dots here. Pretty clearly, we found the never-ending pursuit that you're talking about. Let's say, hypothetically, we caught the slippery fish here. In an adjacent industry where, let's say, PR and comms leaders have a natural disposition to fear, which frankly put mathematics and data science and, quick history lesson, it's thanks to the work that took place in the field of epidemiology during the pandemic when causal inference was born. And what's left is simply the cognitive barriers to change. In other words, there's fear, there's self-doubt, there's a lack of strategic thinking. There's a lack of understanding of what I call like the laws of business physics, right? Like the business mechanics. How does money work? How does, what's the time lag to impact of your activity, et cetera, et cetera. What advice can you give that brave chief communications officer, that comms leader, that public relations strategist who's confident in their work and are really intrigued by this idea that you're talking about, and they want to learn how to apply this causal thinking to their work, practically speaking?
Yeah. So when I look at our experience, there are basically two reasons which may make leaders hesitant. One is some fear actually finding the truth. They are so much in love with their own theory, or they fear if they are proven wrong, that's not good for them, right? So these kind of things that their psyche wants to hold on what they have instead of learning what's working. Those people don't do it. We cannot help them, right? So really, they need to yeah they need to change in that respect. The other type of person is someone who is basically skeptical about statistical systems that autonomously crunch data and find a solution. So this kind of autonomous AI, which just tells you that's the right thing. And for them, we have good news, because causal AI is not a mindless statistics. It's actually how it works. It's really human in the loop by design. Yeah, as I mentioned beforehand, the first step of finding a frame of understanding which data we need and what the data means that I'm collecting, it's a human task. Yeah, it can be advanced with AI, but it's a human task. So it's basically for them, they will learn in a process. We go together and make experiences, and the success actually is what finally convinces you. Yeah, if you just did the exercise, you learned something, and it's working, and of course you're convinced.
Now, that's a great answer, by the way, Frank. This one's going to get a little bit technical, okay? But typically, causal AI frameworks and applied methodologies, they ingest time series data, right? That's converted to qualitative. We convert like the qualitative to quantitative, and after mapping cause and effect relationships and the weights, we can see what's actually worked to move the needle and what, let's say has like the time lag to impacts and things like that. But when it comes to looking out into the future, how can sort of advanced assessment methodologies like counterfactual reasoning, if this happens and this would happen, allow us to war game future outcomes and predict impacts of important decisions like change of investment of a certain campaign, like the AT&T campaign, for example, or layering on additional campaign components to an existing mix of activities?
Hmm. Yeah, so Actually, causal AI, what causal AI doing is it builds an inner mechanics of PR and comms. And imagine basically a machine with some knobs and stuff like that, right? And when you play with that, something goes out. So you use this data to build this machine, but then you can use this machine to simulate scenarios that never have been witnessed before in reality. Yeah. So we just built the machine and can there counterfactually simulate scenarios. And of course, this has limits. Yeah. You can maybe, if it's very out of bound, it's maybe unsafe to do that. But within bounds, you can then simulate scenarios never be done before. So causal AI, in this respect, can also be used to improve predictions. So because a prediction system, oftentimes, even with machine learning, you take the data input and you crunch it to have a minimal failure and output data, but it's purely designed to have a minimum output error on this learning data set. But if your inner mechanics, the thing learns, is not causal, later in application, it will fade, it will drift, it will be bad. Why? Because certain things are not in the model, which influencing input and output at the same time. And if this shifts, which typically in complex systems is the case, then the whole prediction system falls apart. Yeah. And if your model is built on the true mechanics, it's more robust for predictions.
And then I imagine that the executives that are at the ultimate level of accountability for this need to interpret the prediction, use their judgment, understand the trade-offs related to it, and then, make a decision, communicate that decision, take action. Is that where we're going? Is it feeding insights, feeding strategies? Is it making things far more actionable? It can help with setting expectations, placing bets, evaluating risks. Is that what we're talking about here? Almost like if you're a weather, like I used to be a news anchor, so it always goes back to this stuff, is like the weatherman, right, is standing behind him is a hurricane. Now, you could kind of see there's maybe a few paths that hurricane could take. They don't know 100% sure where they're going to go, but they also don't believe it's going to go backwards or some other direction. They've narrowed it down to a few. Is that the kind of counterfactual prediction that we're talking about, or is it something different?
No, it's pretty much that. Yeah. So that's what we have is a deeper understanding what it means to get insights and a deeper understanding what we need to make decisions. Right. We want to understand the mechanics of the thing we are managing, and we want to use that, to make decisions. So understanding it is the best thing to do both.
I used to be part of the problem, Frank. I have to tell you, I used to put what I call the kitchen sink. It's like, let me just prove that that public relations and communications efforts and activities, that they are actually driving sales by, just layering things on together. Let me take the earned media coverage of a brand in a set time and let me layer that on top of sales data or, some sort of organizational objectives and goals. And, there's weighting and scoring and, let's put HR data on top. Let's put whatever business performance data I can muster together, because then when I look at it on a calendar, I can sort of hope and wish and dream that I'm actually proving causation, but actually what I'm doing is just a spurious correlation. There's a time lag to the impact. Unless I test it, right? Unless I know what that lag would be, I wouldn't know that. And I had to really come to terms with that reality. And to be honest, Frank, I think it would be amazing to collaborate on causal with you and just incorporate some of these tools and wisdom into some of even the workshops that PR does, training, co-created learning experiences. I'm already doing with like public relations and communications leaders like in-house and on the agency side. Is that something you'd be open to pursuing with me? I'm going to put you in the hot seat here. And can we work out some details offline? Is working with the public relations and communications industry domain a challenge that you'd be willing to, pursue as a data partner and advisor?
So if the craft sees value in it, yeah, and is ready to change how they do business, yeah, I would be delighted to empower motivated minds in their journey to change the world. Actually, it's pretty close on what we do for marketeers. And I'm pretty confident that it will be fruitful in this way. So, yes, of course.
Well, you heard it there, folks. Live and direct. It's great news. The holy grail for PR and comms is officially being found. And yes, I've already tested it. It's a verifiable fact. uh, Look, this changes the calculus of how career pathing, strategic counsel, ultimately trust and confidence is going to be built by PR and comms leaders in the boardroom. Decision making, critical thinking, problem solving. These are the skills that we really need right now. They're 10x more important than they've ever been. We're relegating a lot of execution to AI. We're working together with machines and humans to make these important decisions, and the human leader's position to weigh the outcomes, interpret the results, interpret the findings, communicate that outwards, inspire others to act and change. And these are the new age skills that we need to develop and foster and build. And if you look back for years, CEOs know that critical thinking is the top quality of, let's say, the top skill set of a public relations or communications leader of the future. But without this sort of thing, there's a really dangerous trap of everyone sort of thinking the same way, everybody assuming the same solutions and the same assumptions continuously, and that becomes a downward spiral, and the level of risks is actually staggering. So the question that I have for you in the audience is, what's actually holding you back? Like, can you afford to sit back and just let others take advantage of this type of reality, this truths, uh, without getting into the game yourself? With that, sadly, we will have to wrap up today's interview, and I want to give you a really heartfelt thank you and express my gratitude to you, Dr. Frank Buckler, for joining me on this interview today. Frank, it's always a great pleasure to meet and collaborate with you.
Thank you for having me.